Maybe she should just say, "Stop bossing me around." I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, there is a new report out of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, reported on by a Charlotte G, J-E-E, in Technology Review, that says that among the ways that the world should address getting more women involved in technology is by having digital assistants like Amazon and Apple and Google assistants not be female by default. And here's what they're saying. They're basically saying that this sends a signal by having these digital assistants that are all female voiced, that women are docile, eager to please helpers without any agency of their own, always on hand to help their masters. And the report calls for companies to stop making them female by default and explore ways to make them sound genderless. Bill, first of all, what do you just think of the findings? And I will acknowledge it's a 145-page report. There's probably more to it than this, but this is part of it.
My first reaction to hearing that opening statement is instead of trying to get more women into STEM, why don't we just let women do whatever they want to do?
Now, could you tell our viewers what STEM is? It has nothing to do with botanists.
Science, technology, I think electronics and math. Engineering and math, sorry.
Okay.
Science, technology, engineering, and math. So these are traditionally male-dominated areas of study, and I mean usually in many cases extremely. I think the pilot population is something like, I want to say 93, 94% male, something like that, general aviation pilots. And so using an example like that I know a little better, my first question is, why do we want to get more women pilots if women can become pilots by simply making the same phone call that a man can? What's so important about having a 50% pilot population in America?
Well, Bill, the reason they're not pilots or scientists or technologists or engineers or mathematicians in greater numbers is because of things like these digital assistants that send the signal over and over, and not to mention Barbie, that send the signal that women are to be docile and not clever and should put their hand down when they're in math class because they should just listen.
This is going to have the same earth-shattering effect that removing the revolver as an emoji and replacing it with a water gun had on the iPhone. A couple years ago, they took out the revolver emoji, replaced it with a water gun, and murder became practically non-existent in the United States. Because it turns out that it was the presence of seeing a little toy a little toy revolver that was driving people to mass murder. And once they decoded this critical element, as you well know, murder in America is essentially non-existent. So I guess it's going to work out just fine.
So they make the title of this UN report, "I'd Blush If I Could, Closing Gender Divides in Digital Skills Through Education." And the title comes from the fact that apparently at one point anyway, Siri, the Apple digital assistant, would respond, "I'd blush if I could," when you said, "Hey Siri, you're a slut."
Right. I'd be willing to bet you that that almost all of the "Hey Siri, you're a slut" input came from men. I bet you a large majority of that came from men. So what does that tell you? What it tells me is that this is a feminist movement looking for any external excuse to explain this disparity, because there can't be any disparity. For progressive thought, anything that you wish to be true has to be true, especially if there are victims involved. And so when you hear women talking about feminists, generally saying there's not enough women engineers, we've got to make 50% women engineers, what they're saying is that we are equal to men in every way, but engineers are not selected by stormtroopers with guns who cull the males, and march them off to the academies while the females are shown to the mud hovels so that they can prepare, some kind of a paste for dinner. It doesn't work that way. And the reason that this has to be destroyed, this difference between the numbers of men and women in various professions, not just engineering and so on, is because if it turns out that, not that necessarily that men are better engineers, but that men as a set are more interested in toying and playing with mechanical things, if it turns out that is true, then that means that there are irreducible truths in the world. And if there are irreducible truths in the world, the progressive movement falls apart, because if it turns out that that you cannot program people, that they are going to behave the way they behave as a species based on the way they behave for the last 100,000 years, if this is all true, then the entire plan to remake society in the image of what they feel they can educate into people becomes null and void. And this terrifies them, and it should.
Well, Bill, I have another theory, because when you asked, what does this tell you? For example, if you say to an Amazon Echo device, hey, Alexa, you're pretty, the answer that you get back is, that's really nice, thanks. If you say the same thing to Google Assistant, you get, thank you, this plastic looks great, doesn't it? A little bit wittier there. Bill, how about the theory that the reason why you get those kinds of answers is because of the political proclivities of people who work at Google, Amazon, and Apple? Don't you think that maybe one particular party is represented in greater numbers? The party that we associate with sexism, perhaps, is dominant in the technology field in California?
Oh, yeah, it's nothing but Republicans all the way down up there in Silicon Valley. First of all, my understanding is that all of these tech assistants have any number of voices that you can use, right?
Yes, but they default to female, and that's the complaint.
Okay. So if they're saying that women's self-esteem is injured because the women do not have either the knowledge or the self-esteem to make one setting change on their iPhones, I don't think they're setting a sterling standard for women who know how to do these things and don't need to be told that they're being suppressed. In other words, if they're saying, well, it defaults to female, it's got to default to one or the other, and they say, well, it could default to this gender neutral thing. Gender neutral is disturbing, and here's something that I think is relevant to this. Somewhere in the 60s, I want to say. Pretty sure it was in the 60s, they began to put audible warnings in cockpits for fighter airplanes. Whenever there was, like you're going into the ground, a voice would say, pull up, pull up. And it was originally a male voice, and the men couldn't hear it. They could not respond to it nearly as well. The female voice cut right through, and so this voice was known as Bitchin' Betty, and that's all this voice did is fuel low. All right, I got it. Fuel is low. I got it. Damn it. Just, but they did that so that voice could cut through. It was just a lot more easy for men to hear with all this noise going on. And so my question is, if it turns out that this is all influenced by such major things as the voice of a piece of machinery, I'm surprised that the males, because they're exclusively male fighter pilots, I'm surprised they simply didn't just throw off their warmongering, violent activities because they had a woman telling them what to do.
I think I find it difficult to speak to a woman in the way. For example, last night we had this Amazon device playing some music, and my wife and I were trying to have a conversation, and I politely asked Alexa to turn the volume down, and that didn't work for one reason or another. And if I recall correctly, and I may be dramatizing this, but if I recall correctly, my wife said, "Hey Alexa, shut up." and it got quiet. Now, yeah. I was raised in a way that I would not speak to a woman that way, But my wife had no problem telling her fellow female voice.
You know, this is yet another example of the entire phenomenon. When you're saying you're at a party and talking to women, you'll often hear feminists complain about mansplaining, or manspreading. The idea that men lecture women as if they know what's going on and the women don't, and how annoying that is, and men take up more space and how annoying that is. And they basically say that what they're saying by this is that this male sense of assertiveness is bothering them. And if their theory is correct, that men and women are interchangeable, none of this should happen. I mean, there should be as much woman-splaining and woman-spreading as there is on the male part. So by saying that men are too aggressive, men are too aggressive and they have to stop being so aggressive because we women are absolutely equal to men and we don't like it, is to defeat the argument on its own.
Let me follow this down a logical path.
Just very quickly, this goes back to the wage gap, the so-called 72 cents on the dollar gap. It turns out that, just as one small example, one of the reasons that men get paid more per working hour on average across the nation, you can't hire somebody at a Walmart and if it's a man, pay him $34,000, and if it's a woman, pay her $27,000. It's against the law, but you find that 97% of all work-related fatalities are men. That's not something I hear addressed in terms of women wanting 50% of that number. So all of this stuff has an explanation, and it's got a biological explanation. And see, the reason I don't have any problem with this at all, with society the way it should be, and often is, and why I have such a major problem with these feminists saying ridiculous things like this, is that I think anybody should be able to obtain any job that they're qualified for, and there are some excellent female fighter pilots, and there are any number of cases like this. So as long as their pathway is not being blocked, then it doesn't matter to me how many, the ratio doesn't matter to me.
And I hate to be a stickler about grammar, Bill, but you said anybody should be able to get any job that they're qualified for. I believe the proper way to phrase that is anybody should be able to get any job that he is qualified for.
That's not what I was saying. In fact, that's precisely the opposite point I was trying to make.
That he or she is qualified for.
That they are qualified for.
So let me follow this down a logical path,
Sure.
Bill, because here's what's going to happen. Let's not make the voice default female. I think some people would be kind of freaked out by a genderless voice unless it was C-3PO. And so...
Let me just interrupt for 1 second.
Go ahead.
Just for 1 second. So they're saying that because it's a female voice and it's servile, it conditions women to become servile, and therefore it has to go. If it defaulted to male, wouldn't the problem be that your digital assistant is some man telling a woman what to do all the time?
Well, the man would be providing information that the woman's elicited from him.
But he'd be the expert. He'd be the one that knew everything. And that's demeaning to women and their egos.
It's a mansplainer. It's a digital mansplainer.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So if it turned out that it had defaulted to male, they would have had a bigger problem with that.
Well, and this is my point.
And this is why their philosophy is going down in flames, Scott, because it doesn't make any sense. And not just doesn't make any sense, it is so internally contradictory that it has to either fall apart or drive people to insanity. I want girls to be athletes, and I think female athletics should get every penny that boys get. I like seeing good female athletes as well. Here's a transgender person who claims whose often cases just says, I feel like a woman today, runs the same race. Every single biological female in the entire track meet is down one level on the podium because of this, and this empowering young girls to be athletes, but at the same time, this guy's a victim. And if you say you're a woman, then you are a woman. And these two thoughts just go into each other, and they simply just annihilate each other in this I was going to say stupid, anti-stupid reaction, but these are two stupidtrons hitting each other, I guess.
Well, if you follow the logic of this, let's say, okay, well, let's make the default voice a male. And then we hear complaints. That certainly sounds like a Caucasian male voice. Why don't you have more diversity in the sound of the voices? Why can't we have African American male voices? So we go to that, and then people say, you know what? I don't like the idea of bossing around an African American man and making him do your bidding. It smacks of slavery. At what point, Bill, do you think that even the left will see the absurdity of that?
Well, as I said just a few seconds ago, that the minute that they do see the absurdity of it, they stop becoming progressives. The problem is that so many of them will never stop seeing the absurdity of it. The problem is that people actually believe this stuff. The problem is that people actually believe that there are not as many women engineers, not because of a biological difference between male and female brains, but because of the man. And it's just not true. It's not true. Every single test that's ever been conducted on this subject shows that men and women have differing but essentially equal skill sets, and that parts of the brain that women dedicate to things like recognition of facial signals, social cues, multiple tasking, and all this other stuff that they're very good at, that in males, that space is taken up with a 3D kind of a situational awareness. I can look down on my table here and I can imagine what the table would look like if I was poking my head out from underneath the clapboard, and I can see all of it reversed in 3D. I can do that. That's not to say that women can't do it, and just to say that as a general rule, they're not as inclined to tinker with stuff. And I have heard many female engineers say the same thing, that they're engineers and they're good engineers, and they go to work and they come in on Monday, and the males come in on Monday having built a walking toaster or something, because it's not just a job for them. It's their proclivity and their aptitude and stuff. So again, I completely disagree with I'm not saying that women can't be engineers. That's the exact opposite of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is everybody in a happy society should be able to do what they want to do, at least what they're qualified to do, and that should be the end of it. It should be the end of it.
At the risk of getting a little too personal here, I've looked at the stats on YouTube for the videos that you produce, Bill. Your audience is roughly 85 to 86% male, with the other whatever. If there were math involved here, I'm sure somebody could do it, but it's not me. So 85, 86% male. What is it about you that for some reason only draws a predominantly male audience and a very small fraction of females? And aren't you concerned about that?
I'm not concerned about it. And the answer to your question is logic and accountability.
How so?
Men are more logical than women, and a common sense solution interests men more than it does women. I'm speaking in generalities. And when you start pulling out exceptions, I know a person, then you're proving the rule. It is, most of the work I do is in response to emotional appeals. It's taking up the weapons to deal with an appeal to emotion, because appeals to emotion have not turned out well historically. And this argument appeals to men more than it does to women. And for those of you who say, well, that's just plain chauvinism, you've never been married, or I don't know, maybe you don't know any women or any men. I know from experience late in life that when my wife has a problem, my first thought is, how do we solve this problem? She doesn't want me to solve the problem. She wants me to listen to her talk about the problem, because by talking things out, it helps women deal with the emotional issues. Men have emotional issues too, and men tend to want to be left alone when they have emotional issues, because that's a difference in brain biology. Best way I ever heard it described was an incredibly great lecture. It's on YouTube. I forget the name of it. And the guy was basically had a female head and a male head, and a room full of thousands of people. And he said, he walked over behind the male statue and he said, ladies, men's brains are like a fishing tackle box. Everything's in a little drawer and everything's compartmentalized. And a man will open up one drawer and he'll look at this thing. He'll work on this thing for a while. When he's finished working on this thing, he'll put it back in the drawer, close the drawer, open something else, and then he'll work on that, concentrate on that. And he said, and the thing you need to understand, ladies, is that the drawer that the men spend most of their time in doesn't have anything in it. To which there's this enormous roar of laughter. Ha, 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 how stupid men are. But what he was saying is men have the ability to disconnect themselves from emotions and simply just sort of reboot. He walked over to the other side of the stage and he said, female brain is like a giant bundle of copper wire where everything's touching everything else and everything's connected to everything else. So when a man goes out to dinner, he says, which do any of these clothes not smell? Because okay, we'll take this and this jacket, fine, off they go. But when women go out and dress for dinner at a friend's house, she starts thinking about things like, okay, I want to look nice, but I don't want to look too nice. I know them pretty well, so I'm not like I want to show off. Plus, I know that her husband got laid off, and if I just dress down a little bit, she'll feel less, a little less conscious of it, and all of these calculations are going through their head. Which, as you and I are big Brian Regan fans, it's like that story Brian Regan tells where his wife, he went to play golf with a friend he hadn't seen in a while. The guy got divorced, and his wife says, "Well, how's John doing?" And he says, I don't know. What happened with the divorce? Didn't come up. You're telling me you know nothing about what's happened to John in the last year? I know he's got a new driver. And it's funny because it's true. It's true. And the problem with feminists is that when you say things like this are true, when you say that men are more inclined to be engineers and pilots than women are, biologically, what they hear is you can't be an engineer or a pilot. And then they get on their, then the wings of the harpies come out and they begin their low-level shriek across the land. But that's not what we're saying at all. Certainly not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that women can't be pilots or engineers or even good pilots or good engineers. I'm saying that the inclination is not as strong as it is in men. And if we just let people do what they wanted to do instead of what they think they're supposed to do, we'd be a lot happier in this country right now. Final thing I'll say on this with STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. I saw the perfect cartoon for this, the perfect 4-panel cartoon. And it was like a job show thing. And there was a booth and there was a man in it. And it said STEM on the booth. And the women go up to the booth. And then in the next panel, instead of seeing women in the booth, you see women outside the booth holding up a sign that says more women in STEM. In other words, the response to having less than 50% engineers in the population, the female response to this is not to make more engineers. The female response to this is to complain about the fact that there are not more engineers. And this is built into the human condition. Not only do I not see anything wrong with it, I think it's beautiful. But whether they like it or not, the truth is the truth, reality is reality, biology is biology, and rules are rules. They can disobey those laws if they want to, but there will be consequences for that. And I'm just happy and proud to be a small voice for a philosophy that's predicated on the way things are, not on the way I want things to be. And because it's predicated on the way things are, it provides maximum happiness for people when the opposing philosophy in America makes people perpetually miserable because it tells them that you have every right to be an NBA basketball player, and the fact that you're 5'1" shouldn't have anything to do with it.
Well, speaking as a man who has heard Betty's voice many times in moments of crisis and had the time, therefore, to pull up and not crash into the ground,
She's saving your life, dumbass.
Yes, she is every day. Ladies and gentlemen, speaking for the 86% of men and 14% of women who are actively engaged with BillWhittle.com, we are grateful to those members who have provided from their own means to support this enterprise. We thank you for that, and we invite those of you who have not yet joined this enterprise to become part of it by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking that Become a Member link. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making it happen.